This is Paul Perrodin interviewing John Henry Lynch, mostly known as Jack Lynch, at his home at 555 Broadway in Hastings-on-Hudson on July 6th at about 11 a.m. Jack, as you know, we're here on the World War II History Project, and I'm really happy that you agreed to participate in this. Maybe we could start by you telling us how and when you got into the service back in the Second World War.
Well, each story has a beginning, and I hope we get to the end. But feeling rather patriotic, 2 or 3 other fellows from Anaconda decided to get down and sign up with the Navy. And of course we were interested. We were all skilled personnel, and we had an opportunity of going down and getting a rating according to skills, and it's exactly what we did.
Jack, let me just ask you, what was the date this all happened?
This 9/43.
In September of 43.
Right.
Okay. And then let me just ask you one other thing. What were your skills that the Navy wanted?
Electrician.
Okay.
And it was a Seabees, which is a construction unit of the Navy. And
Now, who were the fellows that you went in with?
one was the chief electrician down there, McAlone, another fellow by the name of Burton, and they were turned down, and I was lucky enough to draw the winning number. So off we go. It was very interesting down to Grand Central. We were processed and everything else, and that's where I saw Frank Aloysiu down. He was changing light bulbs.
For the Navy or for Grand Central?
No, he was in the Army.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was chosen. I was given a few days to come home and get ready. I didn't travel on a troop train or everything else. They give me the tickets and everything else. I come in with a rating that was comparable to the wages that I was earning and stuff like that. But,
Well, what was your rating?
electrician.
For a second or
Second, and
third
very
class?
shortly I got a first class. And as you'll see in some of the pictures, the graduation and everything else. So off we go to Camp Perry, Virginia, for boot camp. With our group were men 50 and older, construction men. And it was funny as heck. We get out there the first day, and they give us our clothes. We got our hair cut, and this, that, and the other thing. We go out there. We have a sergeant that stood on a stand up there, and he looked down at the guys. You're nothing now. You're absolutely nothing. You say yes, sir, no, sir. All of a sudden, you hear a big Bronx cheer from the back. Those guys didn't give a darn anyway. But anyway, we went through boot camp within about 30 days.
how old were you when
At the
43?
time, I was around 27, somewhere in there. I can refine it, but that was the start of it. And of course, we were right next to Williamsburg, Virginia, and that's where we did get it. There's one thing I remember about it. They always told you never volunteer. I did volunteer. I had a pretty good typist and everything else. So I was assigned to the yeoman school, and I'd type up things for our unit. And as the end result, it was easy. I didn't have to stand duty. I didn't have to wait in a chow line. And so off we went. it was also there that I met Booth. Booth's Diner used to be down on Warburton Avenue. He was a cook, and if you remember, Booth's Diner was right where the gas station is now. It was a real old trolley car diner, and he was there, and that was good because that's another thing you always did was get to know the commissary and the chief. So that it was only about 30 days in there, and then they decided to transfer us up to Davisville, Rhode Island. That's up near Quonset Point. That was another gathering point of CBs. There I underwent training on generators, firefighters, fire equipment and everything else, and they put me in charge. So that eventually, because of the background with the fire department here. And that's where I first began to join in with my wife, Betty. And she would travel whenever it was convenient. So that was the beginning of her bout. In the meantime, she was employed by Eastern Aircraft and worked up there for quite a few years.
What was Eastern Aircraft? Where were they, in Rhode Island?
That's General Motors.
General Motors.
Yeah, Eastern Aircraft is what they call it. And that's where they assembled planes and everything. She worked in the tool crib, where they handed out tools and stuff like that.
Well, were you and Betty married during or before the war?
I was married in 40.
1940. Okay. And then you had made your home in Hastings, of course, before you went on.
Beg pardon?
I said you made your home here in Hastings before you enlisted.
Oh, yes,
with Betty, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Washington Avenue.
Did you have did you have any children before you?
No.
You didn't at the time you went.
No,
Okay.
we didn't have at the time. Bet did have a problem, but that was later. It wasn't until later I returned that we were able to conceive. We had 2 daughters.
Right. How long were you in Davisville?
Davisville was about less than 3 months. Then we were transferred to Gulfport, Mississippi, and good old South and everything else. It was still cold down there, and that's where we went in training for cargo loading and transports and all that good stuff out on bivouac. And then Bet come down there and spend time with me. And like I say, it always got to know the commissary chef. But she'd come down, and lucky enough, we had rented a 2-bedroom bungalow from the principal of the Jackson schools. And lo and behold, our companion was the chief commissary steward. But anyway, Bet was sort of left alone because we'd go out on movies, hikes, this, that, and the other thing. And up in Biloxi was Keesler Airfield. And she applied up there. She got a license from the Army, and she wound up driving a 6x6 garbage truck to fill in the time. Matter of fact, I have a license somewhere, but I never found it out. But we did have a good time in that particular area. So from there, we're transported over to California. And there's one thing that the Navy always did. You always had a nice warm bed, the CBs anyway. And we traveled by Pullman.
That sounds pretty luxurious.
It is. So we wound up.
Now, how long a train trip was that from Mississippi in those days?
It was almost 7 to 8 hours.
78?
7 to 8 hours, because during that time that they would let other troop trains go by and this, that, and the other thing, or for reasons of any espionage that go by, they would take along. They didn't know where the hell we were going.
Right.
They often wondered, I didn't know either. So we wound up just in Ventura, California, and another CB base. And we spent some time there, and they broke us up into units. We were originally meant to relieve the 144th Battalion at Guadalcanal, but by that thing improved, so they broke us up into a maintenance unit. And I was assigned to the base there for a short time, and we did menial labor and everything else, and we were entertained by some of the top-notch entertainers in California, the big band, and that's what we done. And,
Now, tell me, this was, now we're into what, 1944, when you got out to the West Coast? I'm just trying to focus on the chronology.
the chronology on that there is the whole schmear is I spent 2 years in the States and 2 years overseas.
Okay.
So that's how it would work out.
Right.
1 year in the States and 1 year just short a month. And then,
I got you.
yeah.
Okay, so now we're getting into 1944.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
All right.
So, from there, walked to Frisco.
Now, during this time, did you ever run into anyone from Hastings, like you had earlier?
No, I didn't.
No.
No, I didn't. And, no, not until later on that I began to run into people when we got to Pearl
Uh-huh.
and things like that. And, so off we go on the train
Right.
up to Frisco. And on a transport. It's uneventful. There is an awful lot of stories I can tell, but it's not fit for publication on the trip over.
Oh, don't be shy.
You can eliminate it, can't you?
Yeah.
Huh?
I can censor.
Huh?
I can censor it as we go along.
Yeah. Of course, the older guys were keepers for the young seamen and everything else, which we had along to service and everything
Right.
else.
So how long were you in San Francisco?
Hmm?
How long were you in San Francisco?
We loaded right on.
Oh, you did?
We loaded right on from the train, backed in, and off we go. But someone not used to the sea would get seasick, and of course the older guys would help them and cajole them and everything else like that, and say, how would you like a nice big piece of greasy pork? The kids were
Rotten to the core, right?
oh. And another thing they would do.
And they taught you to vomit into the wind, right?
And then another thing was that some of these guys were crazy. The Johns on those things were a great big tub. Seawater come in. There was about six places to sit, and you get in there. And some Jolly Roger would get in there, and he'd light a newspaper on that end. That was fun and games, and some of the officers just didn't make it, and without being sick and everything else. But it was pleasant. But actually, I never met anybody on shipboard locally, and we unloaded in Pearl, and then we were.
Did you go across? Did you go across in a convoy from San Francisco to Pearl, or was this a one ship
it was.
deal?
No, it was a short convoy.
Right.
We zigged and we zagged
Uh-huh.
and everything else because of the threat, and that's exactly what we had done. So we wound up at Pearl, and I was assigned to the Naval Air Station 28, which was Marine flying base, and there I was were put to work on the base. We also worked for contractors on holidays. And I never ran out of booze, because a lot of the officers on base would want favors done, electrical work, this, that, and the other thing. And then the contractor, basically, at that time, it was a territory. It didn't belong to the United States. And that was run by basically 3 families. And boy, oh boy, they really did a job. And so it was a civilian contractor that ran it on base. I worked for him. And we did everything possible. We set up our own quarters at Quonsets, wired it, set up theaters and things. Then on weekends we could go into town, and I got to know a few farmers there, and I got into the egg business because that's something they wanted back on base, was fresh eggs.
Jack, you seem to have a real knack for getting in with a commissary somehow.
Well, that's true. Because that's the one best thing you can do. And the idea is that that's one thing you did learn. So from there, then I did meet my nephew in Pearl. He was aboard a submarine. Jack Lynch, that's his brother.
Uh-huh.
And had an opportunity to visit him. And then, of course, I met Helen. And we also had a beach.
That was Helen, you
McGrath.
showed me her picture, yeah, Helen McGrath.
You can take the picture.
Yep, terrific.
Helen McGrath, she is deceased now, but she worked in a braider room in Anaconda, which I knew her. And she worked for my brother. He was in charge at that particular time, but she joined in, did quite well. As a result of the GI Bill and everything else, she got to be a school teacher. And unfortunately, she had an accident with being hit on one plane, and it cut her tongue, destroyed her taste and everything else like that. And she really came out well. And she had a place in Florida. She had a house here and a house up in Cape Cod. And she had a kidney failure, just like that. It was about 2 years ago, I guess.
Uh-huh.
So that was a sad part of it. And from there on in, and
Well, how long were you in Pearl, Jack?
in Pearl, I was there for about let's see, from Pearl. It was almost winter time, basically, is I would figure it. Anything else, I was shipped out to a place called French Frigate Shoals.
French Frigate Shoals?
Yeah.
And where was that?
That's halfway between Pearl and Johnson Island. It actually was just a shoal, and they used it for a radar and emergency landing strip. And the only thing, I was flown out in one of those Navy ducks, because that's a short landing span and everything else like that. And that was interesting. And
What were your duties there? What were your duties?
they had a failure on the generators, and that's all they depended on.
Uh-huh.
And there was only a small force. It was originally run by Coast Guard, and they had a failure which was necessary for their reefers and everything else. And we did all sorts of things, and to make them comfortable. one of the nicest things was one day there was a storm that was out between there and Johnson Island, and a C-47 landed with a bunch of entertainers, mostly girls. You see, what was the name of it? The groups that used to fly. And boy, did we have fun.
Well, Jack, why don't you tell us what kind of fun you had?
Huh? No, we didn't, but, of course, you know, they put stuff in our coffee to keep us,
To keep you calm down.
yeah, keep calm down
Right.
and all that good stuff. You know, it's just beginning to work now.
Well, I knew your reputation.
But anyway, that's another part of it. Then we were out shark fishing to pass the time away.
No, you're still out on French Frigate Shoal.
Frigate show, that's right. And of course, overdid it. And I collapsed. Stroke.
How old were you? Were you only about 28 then?
Huh?
About 28?
Almost, yeah.
So you had a little sunstroke,
Heat stroke.
heat stroke.
Scared the hell out of me. And all we had was no medical person on board there at all. And scared the hell out of me. So,
So how many people were on that, manning that station?
with manning that station, I'd say around 50.
Yeah.
50 with the everything, the officers and everything else. That was another thing, but that C-47 come in. You had to be a good pilot. So he's almost near the end of the runway. And the pilot did a ground loop, and right there was the officer's Quonset hut. The wing sheared the top off of it. And you never saw guys run through screen doors to get there. So anyway, they flew me back to my base, and with heat stroke and everything, and did treatment.
So they flew your base being Pearl Harbor, you know?
At what you call Kaneohe Naval Air Station.
Right.
That was my base. And then from there, they decided on treatment to ship me to Corvallis, Oregon, because of the cooler weather and this, that, and the other thing.
This is all related to the sunstroke, yeah?
That's right.
Or heat stroke.
And the heat stroke, and it threw my whole system out.
Wow.
And this is why today I don't sweat too much or anything. And so I was invalid out of service. I still get a pension,
Mm-hmm.
disability pension, and then that's where we talk about our wives again. That come out to Corvallis, Oregon, and joined me there. And
Now, what town was that? Give me the name of that town again.
Corvallis, Oregon.
Corvallis.
University of.
Okay.
Okay. As a matter of fact, it was on the university grounds that they had this particular hospital. There was an awful lot of people that we met there that were, because of related problems and everything else. So she come across country and everything else, joined me there. And I was an outpatient, and we were able to rent a room in a frat house.
Mm-hmm.
And we stayed there, and then they sent me home for further treatment here in the state. And that was, 8/28 when I was discharged on the West Coast.
Now, this was in 45 now. 1945.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And that was out there on the West Coast when you got discharged.
Mhm.
And then you came back to New York?
New York, and pursued our life. It was a couple years after that I was able to have children and everything else. And then from there I spent most of my life servicing the village.
Yeah.
No, I mean, with the fire department
Right.
and the board of trustees
Yeah.
and all that crap.
Yeah, you were the fire chief, you were chief of the fire department?
Sure, I was chief of the fire
Right.
department.
On the board of trustees?
Since '36, board of trustees, deputy mayor, all that good stuff.
All that good stuff.
Yeah.
Now, what, did you find it, when you returned to civilian life, did you find it a difficult thing to do, or how did you find the transition?
Well, the transition was that I was still treated here in New York. And,
What hospital were you treated?
272 3rd Avenue. It's a treatment center down there, and for outpatients. We finally got it straightened out. But I had almost 100% disability. Now it's down to 15. So.
Something got better, right?
Huh?
It got better.
I got better, right? I come a long way. Matter of fact, I have tape on Mississippi. I have tape on Corvallis.
Now, when you say you have a tape, what kind of tape?
VCR.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, from those days?
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
You want to see it?
Well, I'd like to see it sometime. I don't have time to see it now.
Yeah.
I think that'd be, and these tapes were all taken at the time. They were a whole movie type of thing. Is that it?
No, it was a 16 millimeter. And
16.
I had converted. The only thing they were out of sequence, so I've been trying to straighten them out.
Oh,
And I want to do that.
okay.
But so home we went, and here I am, still breathing.
Well, you're looking well.
But like I say, the saltpeter is beginning to work.
Well, it's spoken by a true gentleman over the age of 29.
Yeah.
Well, Jack, I want to thank you very much for this part of the interview, and I hope we can do another tape at another time about the earlier warriors when you worked at Anaconda.
No, like a sleeping giant awakens,
Yeah.
And it was something to see, and all of a sudden it came to life. Bob Fulton later became president. Here's something I want to show you.
Sure, let me just turn this off.